Good morning, is this everyone? I realised the queues were running a bit behind. Okay. I realise I haven't got a lot of time, so I'm just going to start now. If you do have any questions and we run out of time for any questions, please come and find me at the end. I'm about all day. But my name is Amy, and I'm here from Pandas Foundation. Sorry, is my microphone a bit far away? Sorry. I'll start again. My name is Amy. I'm from Pandas Foundation, which is pre- and postnatal depression advice and support. We also offer support for other kinds of mental illnesses that happen either... Sorry, I'm going to move it right up. No, it's all right. Is it any better? Can you hear me now? Okay, that's better. Sorry. So, my name's Amy. I am from Pandas Foundation, which is a charity for pre- and postnatal depression advice and support. And I'm here to talk about perinatal mental health from a peer support perspective. We aren't a medical charity. We are a peer support charity who refers on to people who specialise in treating. But what we do is we do the peer support and a little bit of helping women who are either going through diagnosis or have been diagnosed. So we exist essentially to provide support, advice, and give a voice to people going through depression, anxiety, things like OCD, as well as general perinatal mental illnesses. So today, I'm going to focus on the two main illnesses that we see, which are depression and anxiety. There are a lot of other perinatal mental illnesses that you can see, such as OCD. You have emergency situations like psychosis, which we would consider to be a medical emergency as opposed to something that we would specifically deal with. But the two main ones we see are depression and anxiety, and those can happen during pregnancy or after the birth of a child. We do know that if you have a prenatal mental illness, so if you have depression or anxiety during pregnancy, there is a 1 in 3 chance of it moving on to the postnatal period. So with having a lot of midwives in the room, we think it's really important to sort of address these symptoms and these issues early. We know early intervention can prevent it occurring later on or prevent it continuing postnatally. As I've said before, we are not a medical organisation, so we don't diagnose. A lot of these symptoms that I'm describing will be medical terms, but we see them from a peer support perspective and then we signpost on. I'm also going to talk about some of the risk factors associated with it. Again, we can't determine why some people get unwell and why some people don't, but we do know there are certain risk factors associated with perinatal mental illnesses, and I'm just going to go through those as well so that there's something to be on the lookout for. And I'm going to go through what Pandas actually does, the support services that we offer when it comes to peer support, either online or in person. Sorry if I do sound like I'm rushing through, I just know we are low on time today. So what is, sorry. Is it very quiet? I'm so sorry. Sorry, I'll try and talk louder, I'm very sorry. So perinatal mental illnesses are what we're discussing, and they are illnesses that occur during pregnancy or after the birth of a child. There is no known way to completely prevent somebody from getting a perinatal mental illness, but we do know that there are things that put you at greater risk. The main thing we find with Pandas is that without a strong support network, your risk of getting a perinatal mental illness is much greater. And that's what we find ourselves set up to provide, is that support service, either as an early intervention or when somebody has been diagnosed. With or without a mental health problem, being pregnant or having a child is a difficult time. And it's important to almost address that in a way of saying that it's okay to be not coping as well as you thought you would, but if you do have a mental illness, it is also important to speak out and get help. So these are some of the most common perinatal mental illnesses that we see. A lot of them are linked in together. So you've got depression, anxiety, psychosis, intrusive thoughts, which you may see as part of OCD or maybe on their own. And that's the kind of intrusive thoughts, everybody has them. If you are, for example, on a cliff top and you suddenly think jump, that's an intrusive thought. It doesn't mean you're going to do it. It's just a thought that has popped into your head. It's when these intrusive thoughts become something that you can't cope with, that become difficult to get rid of, that's when it becomes an issue. We also have compulsive disorders, PTSD and birth trauma, which are kind of the same term for slightly different things, self-harm and eating disorders. Some of these are things that happen either already an issue and then become worse during the pre or postnatal period, and some of them only occur because of that situation. So the first one I'm going to go through is depression. Again, you may have seen some of these before, but we've just divided them up into physical, emotional, and social elements of depression. So the physical ones, lack of energy, tension, change in appetite. You've also got a lack of concentration and sleep disturbances. Emotional, we've got low mood, tearfulness. Tearfulness not always apparent. It's important to say the stereotypical crying mum holding a baby is not the experience that most people will say happened to them. You've also got feelings of guilt, worthless or uselessness, which comes down to this perfect mum image that everyone thinks they will have, a lack of self-care, and sometimes irritability or anger. I do want to point out from a peer support perspective that most of this irritability and anger that we see is self-directed. A lot of parents are very angry at themselves, and that's the way we tend to see it. And then you've got social symptoms, which aren't always talked about, but there is isolation and loneliness, either self-isolating because they feel concerned about how they'll be perceived, or already being isolated, which exacerbates these symptoms. Conflict with parents or partners or friends or family, and their support network, essentially, it can cause conflict with them, and a distancing as well, and a fear of seeking help. Depression in the postnatal period can fade within the first few months, but it can continue for a long time. And if it isn't diagnosed, it can continue long after the 1 year vague guideline that they give for the postnatal period. We see a lot of people who weren't diagnosed within that first year because they didn't ask for help or because there wasn't enough early interventions, who go on to have long-term problems, even into when their children are starting nursery, beginning school. The other one that we see is anxiety. Anxiety is really common, essentially, just in life, regardless of whether or not you're pregnant or you're having a baby, you've had a baby, everybody has periods of anxiety. Anxiety is considered a normal response if it's something that you can cope with. It's fight or flight, everybody knows it. If you're nervous, it's because of an extreme situation or something that's making you stressed and you get anxiety symptoms. It's your body preparing for action. 2/3 of women reporting anxiety during pregnancy also reported anxiety postnatally. They often come hand in hand with depressive disorders. And this seems to be particularly true for women in the pregnancy period, as anxiety symptoms tend to come up a lot, regardless of whether they're diagnosed with depression or anxiety. You can see from the symptoms they're divided into feelings, thoughts, actions, and reactions. So our feelings are anxious, nervous, worried. A feeling that something bad's going to happen is generally just feeling very unsettled and very unsure. Thoughts can be worrying, racing thoughts, imagining the worst, so worst case scenario or catastrophizing any given situation. Actions can be seen, these are interesting because one of them is starting jobs and not finishing them. We see a lot of women who are on maternity leave, who have anxiety, who suddenly decide they're going to start a blog, or they're going to write a book, or they're going to start running or cycling or doing all these amazing things, and then they can't do them, but they just have so much energy that they need to get rid of. That's where this starting jobs and not finishing them comes in. It's an inability to sit still and relax. Yeah. Sorry. Is on there better? Yeah? Is that a bit better, everyone? Sorry, I think it was rattling against my snappy or irritable behaviour and changes in habits. And then the physical reactions kind of feed into this cycle of anxiety where people are having things like a rapid pulse, a tight chest, sweating or flushing, which can make them worried they're ill, which can make anxiety worse. We also see some specific pregnancy or birth-related things such as fear of birth, tocophobia. This can happen either primary when she's never had a baby, or secondary if she's had a baby with a poor experience or perhaps a traumatic experience and then goes on to be afraid of giving birth again. There are also medically relevant phobias that come up, like needle phobia. I think that's one of the more common ones we see, where women are afraid of blood tests, routine appointments. I mean, myself, I had anxiety, and when I went in for my first appointment and they told me I had to have bloods taken, I had Emla cream pretty much from my wrist to my shoulder and was wrapped in cling film and still spent the whole time crying. And I had no real experience of the medical circumstances surrounding birth, and that was what made things worse for me when it came to my anxieties. And it's really common to see women who have no real experience of the medical environment having these anxieties, having these feelings of anxiety when it comes to giving birth. I did go on to have 6 months worth of heparin injections, which essentially cured me of my fear of needles, but not everyone will have that. One thing I want to say, that one thing that comes up a lot is we're often asked when these symptoms are normal. The answer that we would give it is that it's all about how you're coping. This is a key word to look out for, is coping. So when we talk about, for example, if people are particularly overprotective of a newborn, that can be entirely normal. It's not something that necessarily should flag up to you if they're saying, oh, I'm really worried my baby's sounding a bit funny when they're sleeping. Are they breathing okay? Sometimes I don't quite want to go to sleep because I'm a little bit nervous. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong, because I think all new mums are a little bit anxious, but it's when they're unable to cope, and that's what we need to be looking out for. You can see clinical cases as well, of things that you have experience with, such as raised blood pressure, if somebody's had a diagnosis of strep B and needs more interventions. Things that you would see normal on a day-to-day basis are not normal for the parents, and that can be something that they're anxious about, that it's easy to be almost dismissive of, because you know that it's not something to worry about. We know there's good practice, I mean, you're all here, but it's just important that we make sure that when somebody does flag up that they are anxious, that you are listening to those concerns and, you know, really making them feel heard. A lot of anxiety comes down to a loss of control. That can be of emotions, of feelings, of the situation itself, especially during childbirth. There is this feeling of a loss of control, of things being taken out of your hands. And that can create a real fear. It's really hard sometimes to get over that helplessness. So we encourage people to ask for help, because that's a way of taking that power back. If you're not feeling well and you turn around and you say, I need help, that's a very strong thing to do. I don't think many people in this room can say that when they're not feeling that they can cope, they automatically go to somebody and say, can you help me out? I'm not coping. We're not programmed to do that. So when parents come to us or go to their healthcare provider and say, I need a bit of extra support, that's actually a really strong thing to do, and it's important to make sure that people are aware of that they're doing something very strong. So we'll go through some of the risk factors. Again, these are not all of the risk factors involved, but so these are some of the main ones. And the first one coming up is previous history. Obviously, when people come to you and say that they have a previous history of depression, that's when you should just note that down and make sure that you're aware of that. A family history, especially if a woman's mother has had postnatal depression, that does make her more likely to get postnatal depression. High expectations, domestic violence or abuse, obviously that is the lack of support, that is the fear, there are so many elements coming in when it comes to violence or abuse that can cause these issues. Socioeconomic problems, that's obviously quite a big risk factor. Relationship issues. You've also got health issues, hyperemesis, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia. Anything that requires that bit more intervention adds a level of risk when it comes to perinatal mental illness. Traumatic or premature births. The one I will say with this one is traumatic is relative. So if you see what is considered a clinically normal birth, everything's gone well, but one or both of the parents feel that it went beyond their control and feel traumatized, it's a traumatic birth. It doesn't have to be something that was, you know, an emergency situation. It could be a home birth, but it can still be traumatic. And then obviously we've got loss. So we've got miscarriage, stillbirths, terminations and bereavements. These are all, whether it's prior or at the time, because you can still go on to have a perinatal mental illness even with that element of loss involved. So the consequences, there are real consequences to perinatal mental illness, and it can be concerning to talk about for a lot of people, but there are these consequences involved. You've got a risk of lower birth weight and prematurity, especially we know when it comes to stress hormones in the mother during pregnancy, that adds this risk. Mental illness is still one of the highest causes of maternal death. That hasn't changed. You may well have seen the reports. This has not moved. A risk of stopping medication. If they're on a medication for a prior illness, or even if it's not a mental illness, if they're on a long-term medication and they get anxious, they can suddenly stop that, and that's not good. That's not what they should be doing. Risk of mental health problems in partner and family. Pandas has Pandas Dads, which supports dads who are not only going through a paternal mental illness, but are supporting their partner through perinatal mental illness. And we do see a lot of the time that if the mum has issues with their mental health, then the dad or the partner for same-sex relationships can also have these issues come up because of the issues that come with supporting someone. Unhealthy coping mechanisms, that can be smoking, drinking, those sort of things. Relationship breakdown, that's a very real risk. So some of the statistics, I do have these with their sources. If anyone is interested, you can find me afterwards, or this will be made available, and on the notes of the slide there are the sources. But I'll just go through them quickly. We've got 1 in 7 mothers suffering with postnatal depression, 1 in 15 having mental health problems during pregnancy. Of the people we surveyed just over 1,000 women as part of our P&D Awareness Week last year, and 57% had considered at some point taking their own lives. 46% of women surveyed by the Boots Family Trust said they were not completely honest about their feelings to their healthcare providers. You may also have seen the NCT had their Hidden Half campaign, where they said they believe half of all perinatal mental illness does not go diagnosed. So this 1 in 7 could be far greater. And the 30% of parents who took part in Panda's big survey said they had to go back several times to a healthcare provider before help and diagnosis was given. Now, we do know that this isn't everybody. We do know that there are healthcare providers who are very aware of perinatal mental illness. Again, you are in the room here learning about this, but it is important to note that sometimes people won't go back. If people come for help and don't feel heard, they might never go back again and become undiagnosed. So Pandas is the UK's leading pre- and postnatal mental health charity. We provide advice and support from peer support perspective, that's hard to say, which means that most of our volunteers have been through perinatal mental illnesses and come through the other side. We support women, men and their families affected by pre- and postnatal mental health illnesses. And we offer them an opportunity to share knowledge, experience, as well as emotional, social and practical help. So it is people supporting people. The support groups we run we have volunteers who are fully trained, fully aware of safeguarding, but they are leading a group of people in the same situations to talk about their experiences and feel less alone. These are the services that we have. We have our helpline, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. We have a closed Facebook group, again fully supported by trained admin and signposting to relevant health services where necessary. We have email support. We have our Pandas Dads, which is a separate community for dads, and we have our support groups. I believe there are just over 50 support groups now, but they are growing. These are some testimonials from service users, just show how important peer support can be. So this group has helped me by allowing me to talk about my feelings without being judged in a relaxed, informal environment. Mums sharing their experience of postnatal depression has helped me understand that the feelings I have are very common, normal, and that I'm not a bad mother. Pandas was and still is there for me when nothing else and no one else seemed willing to help. I know I can contact them whenever I need help, from a little wobble to a big meltdown. I have recommended them to so many people I know. I don't know what would happen, if they didn't exist. When I was at my lowest, I couldn't talk to anyone about how I felt. Just reading made me feel I wasn't alone. When I felt I wasn't good enough to live, talking to others on Pandas kept me going another day. Without having somewhere to turn, I don't think I would still be here. Friends and family do not understand. And this last one, again, I'll just skip through it because I believe we are running out of time, but this is just saying Pandas was a lifeline and a listening ear. And again, peer support is not a replacement for healthcare services, it's not a replacement for the right therapies and things like that, but what we provide is just that holding hand. And often when people contact us, we are the first point of call. They haven't told their partners, they haven't told their midwife, their health visitors, their doctors. They're just worried, and we're the ones who say, speak to somebody, talk to somebody. There is help out there, and we will be there with you every step of the way.